Lately, mayors have really been taking center stage in the national spotlight. I mean, these municipal leaders are essentially the CEOs of their cities, right? And they constantly become lightning rods for the absolute biggest hot button topics we all care about. Things like public safety, affordable housing, and universal childcare. We've seen the rise of super dynamic figures like Sohar Mamdani over in New York, who literally in his first 6 months managed to expand childcare access, fill 100,000 potholes, and aggressively target ultra-wealthy property owners. So naturally, as we look toward the 2026 mayoral race in America's second largest city, Los Angeles, everyone's watching. People are asking, is LA gonna get its own revolutionary leader? Candidates like Nifia Rahman are definitely generating a ton of excitement, with supporters really hoping for some sweeping, transformative changes on the West Coast. So welcome to This Explainer. Today we're doing a deep dive into the governance, history, and structural differences between Los Angeles and New York City's mayoral powers. Because as you'll see, the reality of leading LA is vastly different from leading a place like New York.
And that brings us to what I think is the central mystery of urban governance in California. Why on earth does America's second largest city give its mayor so remarkably little power? Seriously, think about it. Even if Los Angeles manages to elect a truly revolutionary candidate, someone ready to completely overhaul the system on day one, their actual authority is fundamentally restricted. And here's the kicker. This lack of executive power is no accident. It's totally by design. To really wrap our heads around how a major American city operates with its hands tied, we've got to look at the numbers.
Okay, let's dive into this. Let's look at the numbers. The New York mayor commands a genuinely staggering budget of $125 billion. The LA mayor, by comparison, they're working with a budget of under $15 billion. I mean, why such a massive discrepancy? Well, because New York is practically a city-state. It's made up of 5 boroughs, each representing its own county, all unified under one massive 8.5 million-person umbrella. Los Angeles, on the other hand, is completely fragmented. Sure, Los Angeles County holds 10 million people, but within that county, there are 88 distinct, totally separate cities. The city of Los Angeles is just one of them, making up only about 40% of the county's population. That means people living in places like Beverly Hills or Santa Monica don't even vote for the LA mayor, even though they're obviously part of the very fabric of the LA region.
Section 1. The jurisdictional maze.
So when a region is carved up into 88 different cities all intertwined with county borders, the real-world symptoms become pretty glaring. Just look at the massive juggling act an LA mayor has to perform. In New York, if the mayor wants to tackle something like homelessness, they deal with social services, health, housing, and public safety. And all of those departments report directly to them. Easy, right? But in Los Angeles, the mayor completely lacks that direct control. Public health and half of the housing infrastructure actually belong to entirely different jurisdictions. For an LA mayor to build a coherent housing or homelessness policy, they have to navigate the city level, cooperate tremendously with the state and federal governments, and critically, they have to negotiate with the county, which is a completely different jurisdiction that New York simply doesn't have to deal with. Literally any sweeping executive change regarding education, transportation, or tax revenue requires a vast council of decision-makers to agree.
Now, the reality of LA's regional governance obviously isn't brain surgery, but it is kind of like having 2 different surgeons doing different parts of an operation who may loathe each other from time to time. Other times they might work together beautifully, but still. This perfectly captures the bureaucratic gridlock. You essentially have a city mayor and a county board trying to operate on the exact same patient, the homelessness crisis, for example. But they're using overlapping tools, separate budgets, and sometimes completely conflicting political incentives.
Section 2. Designing the anti-New York.
So you've got to ask yourself, why would a city intentionally design its leader to be so incredibly weak? Well, to figure that out, we have to travel back to the late 1800s and early 1900s. Back then, LA experienced a massive influx of migrants from the East Coast, and these new arrivals were painfully familiar with the deeply corrupt political machines that controlled cities like New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia, most notably Boss Tweed and Tammany Hall. When they arrived in Los Angeles, they were absolutely determined not to replicate that system. No way. This fear actually triggered the progressive movement in LA during the 1920s, which was a period of aggressive political reform meant to permanently prevent any single politician from gaining unchecked power.
So, how did they pull this off?
Well, the progressive-era reformers in LA successfully marginalized party politics by decentralizing power entirely. It was a real game changer. They deliberately stripped basic government functions away from the central city government and established independent commissions of leading citizens to run things instead. The education system, run by one commission. The airports, another commission. The water supply, You guessed it, yet another. They wanted to make absolutely sure that no single person could consolidate the resources necessary to become a corrupt boss like they had seen back east. And they didn't stop there. To further dilute executive power, the city charter established 15, yes, 15 very powerful city council members representing different districts. Now, while the charter did technically create a decently powerful mayor on paper, it heavily counterbalanced them with this incredibly strong city council and those independent city commissions we just talked about. It was essentially an extreme laboratory for the good governance reforms of the 1920s, specifically meant to disperse authority and intentionally weaken the central player of the city.
Section 3. Cars and property taxes.
Let's move to and see how this builds, because structural reform wasn't the only thing dividing Los Angeles. Technology actually played a massive role in physically and financially fracturing the region. Remember, LA is a much younger city than its East Coast counterparts, and it truly exploded during the era of the internal combustion engine. The invention of the car led to rapid suburbanization as all these farmlands transformed into neighborhoods. As these areas grew and became wealthier, a lot of affluent communities chose to officially incorporate as their own separate cities. Why? Well, to maintain strict local control. By incorporating, they could control their own schools, their zoning laws, policing, and most importantly, their tax revenue. This basically allowed affluent neighborhoods to benefit from the broader Los Angeles economy without having to actually share their governance or their tax resources with poorer communities.
And this brilliantly illustrates how things got even more complicated. This structural division paved the way for the next major blow to shared municipal resources, Proposition 13. Passed in 1978, this law marked the beginning of a massive taxpayers' revolt in California. Proposition 13 rigidly capped property taxes. Before this, property taxes were the primary engine funding local services like schools and housing development. By capping these taxes, the law severely restricted the local revenues available to cities across the state, which completely upended how local government financed itself.
The fallout from Proposition 13 drastically shifted city planning. Seriously, with property taxes capped, cities suddenly had to scramble to find alternative sources of revenue just to survive. This created powerful systemic incentives for cities to prioritize commercial development over residential development. So instead of building housing, they started building massive shopping centers and sprawling auto malls just to capture sales tax. This prioritized commercial zoning fundamentally changed the relationship between cities and the state, and it heavily compounded the severe housing and cost of living crisis that any modern LA mayor is completely desperate to solve today. They simply do not have the tax base or the zoning history to just easily build their way out of the problem.
Section 4. LA's next political rivalry.
Okay, so we've seen how intentional fragmentation, independent wealthy suburbs, and a massive tax revolt have totally restrained the mayoral office. But hold on to your hats, because this fractured power structure is about to face an unprecedented new complication. Just as candidates are currently lining up for the highly anticipated 2026 city mayor race, an entirely new center of gravity is forming on the horizon. Beginning in 2028, voters across the entirety of LA County will elect a powerful new county executive. Political analysts are already describing this position as effectively a county mayor. I mean, this introduces a wild new dynamic into a region that is already infamous for its overlapping and competing jurisdictions. Which leaves us with this pressing question for the future of the city. When 2028 arrives, how are these two leaders actually going to interact? Will the new county mayor and the city mayor recognize each other as partners, working in tandem to navigate this incredibly complex web of commissions, cities, and county lines? Or are they going to become fierce political rivals, fighting for control over the exact same issues? Remember those two surgeons operating on the same patient we talked about earlier? The outcome of this newly structured dynamic will ultimately determine whether LA can finally cure its most pressing crises, or if that intentional anti-New York design will continue to paralyze its progress. It's a fascinating political experiment for sure, and one we will undoubtedly be watching very, very closely.